Hello, my name is Faith Faber, and I will be doing a presentation on The Red Convertible by Lois Edrick. And I will be talking about how the convertible in this story is a representation of Henry's innocence of youth and his freedom, and it's essentially a representation of his mental health. And I'm going to chronicle the decline of this car throughout the story using quotes. And finally, I'm going to move into a portion where I talk about how the decline of this car and Henry's mental health throughout this story makes sense due to the context of this story, and that context being Native Americans' involvement in the Vietnam War. So, why this metaphor? Why does the car represent innocence and later loss of innocence as the car goes through a physical decline? Well, the car was initially bought on a whim. It was bought with not much thinking. It was just kind of a spur of the moment thing that the brothers did so that they could connect and just live life and have fun. In fact, Lyman actually says, then, before we had thought it over at all, the car belonged to us and our pockets were empty. So this quote tells us that the brothers didn't have that much money, and yet they still bought this car. And that's not something that maybe a more mature person would have done. And so it shows that they're innocent. They want to go travel the world and they don't want to think it through too much. They just want to have fun. And these stories that they have while they're on this road trip in this convertible are positive. They have a girl that hitchhikes with them and then they stay with their family. And overall, it is a positive trip. And by associating these positive events with the convertible, we get the idea that the brothers are innocent and fun, and they don't have any issues as of now. At this point in the story, we know that both of the brothers are happy. Henry is happy, and the car is in mint condition. So they kind of represent each other. But when Henry is drafted to the Vietnam War, the car is just idling. The car is either up on blocks or it is taken apart, and it is not in perfect condition. The car sitting around and idling in the backyard of the brothers' home shows how a decline is starting to happen to this car. Henry is starting to lose his innocence, he's starting to lose his youth, and he's having to harden up in the Vietnam War that is not treating him well. And when he comes home, it's apparent. His entire family can tell that he's changed, and he starts to show signs of PTSD and depression. This is when Lyman decides to beat up the car and basically ruin it, so that he might hope that his brother will fix it and become himself again, and that the car will be repaired and it will bring them back to their youthful innocence that they experience at the beginning of this story. In the last movement of this story, Henry fixes up the car, and Lyman and him go on a little joyride over to a river. However, this does not end how Lyman hopes it does, and we find out that Henry can never truly return to who he was before he went to the Vietnam War. And this represents the reality of people that have PTSD and trauma from war. They can work on it and try to fix it up, just like how Lyman or Henry was trying to do to the car, but in the end, they can never truly recover without help. And this is when Henry commits suicide and Lyman decides to push the car into the water after him, finally showing that this car is basically an embodiment of Henry, and Lyman cannot have this car without having Henry. So the two exit the story together. So is this really just a story about two brothers where one meets a sad fate? No. There's actually a much deeper meaning to Henry's experiences, And this is because of the history behind the Native Americans' involvement in the Vietnam War. Approximately 82,000 Native Americans were drafted to help in the Vietnam War. And once the war ended, there were studies done on Vietnam War veterans about the role of PTSD and depression in their life after the war. These studies showed that Native Americans suffered disproportionately from PTSD and mental health problems due to their involvement in the war. This is also referenced in The Red Convertible. While Henry was not around, we talked about what was going to happen to him. We were afraid that if we brought Henry to the regular hospital, they would keep him. They don't fix them in those places, Mom said. They just give them drugs. Native Americans suffered disproportionately from PTSD and other mental health problems after the Vietnam War because they did not have the same opportunities as other races to get help with these problems. And this is shown exactly in this quote. Even though Lyman and his mom want to help Henry, there's nowhere where they can take him where he will get proper mental health help. On top of this, the author herself said that she likes to write about characters that are stuck between two cultures and are not normally talked about. Even in other pieces that are written by Edric, she writes about isolated Native American communities that traditions intermingle with other cultures, and this is not always a smooth intermingling. Often it is met with conflict. And she also says that she likes to write about characters that are marginalized and don't always find redemption and acceptance. This is basically Henry. Henry is a Native American that is drafted by colonialist United States to help in their war efforts. These are two different cultures that he's stuck in between, and even though the U.S. will take advantage of him for his help with the war, they do not help him afterwards, and he's taken advantage of. All in all, it is important to note that while we read this story and notice how this car reflects Henry's loss of innocence and mental health decline throughout the story, that these are due to real world happenings. And these happenings are not just word of mouth, but they are results of a study. The Matsunaga Vietnam Veterans Project, which was done by the National Center for PTSD, showed that about 1 in 3 American Indian Vietnam veterans who served in country suffered from full or partial PTSD at the time of the study, which was a quarter of a century or more after the war, but more than 2 in 3 American Indian Vietnam veterans suffered from full or partial PTSD sometime since Vietnam. In comparison to white or Japanese American Vietnam veterans, the prevalence of PTSD in American Indians is more than twice as high. And this is seen as possibly a result of the traditional spiritual and community values that Native Americans hold, and how being in the military and this aggression and killing is so opposite of what they have lived through and morally believe in their entire life. And this just goes to show that what Edric was talking about people being stuck between two cultures, is so prevalent in Native American Vietnam War veterans. Now that my presentation is drawing to a close, I think it is important to note that when reading postmodern pieces such as The Red Convertible by Edric, to look for a deeper meaning other than just the surface level story that is going on. At first glance, this piece might just seem like a story about two brothers who go on a trip in a red convertible, and one of the brothers end within a fateful death. But this story actually has a lot of hidden context intertwined throughout the piece. And this intertwined context is the fateful history of Native American veterans after the Vietnam War. These stories of these Native American veterans are not told in the normal history books we read in high school, and these are marginalized stories that need to be shared. This is a part of history that is not being talked about and is an extremely important part of the history of the Vietnam War. So in the future, when you read more postmodern literature similar to The Red Convertible by Edric, try to look for a deeper meaning past the base story that you are already reading. And look for a social commentary that the author might be trying to get out to you, because it is often a very important message. And here are my sources, and thank you for watching my presentation.